Hi, good morning. Welcome to the show. This is R.N. Bhaskar from BKBB, which is an acronym for Bhaskar Ki Business Baatein. This is a channel that brings you panel policy analysis, conversations, short stories, once every week. But right now at 8:15 in the morning, we bring to you news behind the news. We look at headlines and try to understand what is important about this headline. And today, I have my co-anchors, Katya. Welcome, Katya. Aparna. Welcome, Aparna. And of course, Hussaina. Welcome to you as well. And the titles that we shall be discussing are given on the screen. The first is Modi decides to visit China after 7 years. Could be momentous. The second is RBI opens up a path where a small finance bank can become a full-fledged bank. The third is where you're talking about how cotton export or textile garments exporters, the textile industry could get jitters because of Trump. And the fourth one is how MGNREGA has its own fluctuating fortunes. Let's take the first story first. After doing everything that he could to try not to annoy the US, remember Modi did not even go for the Kazan meeting in Russia, which was an important meeting. And he did not go for the last BRICS summit also in Rio de Janeiro. Suddenly, the way he's been treated by Trump and the way India has been humiliated by Trump seems to have got the government its spine back. And the government has decided that the Prime Minister will visit Tianjin in China. Why is the visit important? One, because next year, India is the president of the BRICS summit. BRICS is important because it's overtaking the rate of growth even of the G7. And earlier, Modi was a little careful about how to approach BRICS because he didn't want to annoy the US. But you can expect Modi to go full bang next year when he assumes presidency of this organization and India's host. Yesterday, he had a talk with Lula on how to handle the Trump tariffs. And Putin has also agreed to come to India. All these developments suggest that there's a new alignment which is getting to be powerfully reconciled against the G7, particularly against Trump. Expect a lot of decisions to get taken in Tianjin this time, which in turn will be evident in full display by next year when the BRICS summit is held. Take the next one. The next story is by Katya. It's about small finance banks.
Okay, something has happened after again a gap of 11 years. RBI has given a universal banking license to AU SFBs, a small finance bank. See, this is good news because SFBs have been asking for it for a very long time. They said that the classification of being an SFB is actually pulling their brand value down. Brand value is very important for a bank to get deposits, to be able to give loans, to be able to bring in those footfalls and customers into the bank. So this is going to be a really, really interesting move for the company, for the bank. And SFB is also AU SFB in particular has been doing a very good network expansion. They have over 2,000 touch points. They are present in 21 states, and then their customer base has been growing. Why SFBs are important to the market is because they are the only ones who have been expanding the network. They're going into rural areas. They're putting up a lot more ATM infrastructure, which a lot of large private banks have actually been very slow in putting up. So this is an interesting move. But if you look at it, Edelweiss's Rashesh Shah long back has said something very interesting. He said there is not much runway for growth if somebody gets a universal banking license now. So there is very little growth because margins are truncating. Startups are eating away part of their business. They're taking away the loan, loan business as well. So what do you think, sir? Do you think universal bank license doesn't have the pull that it used to have? But SFBs are really important because they're the only ones who are actually deeming to grow.
You
So
are right, and we'll have to try and distinguish between large NBFCs, small finance banks, and the regular banks. The large NBFCs are also doing the same thing of building up rural networks, except that they don't have ATMs.
right,
The
they can't
small
do
finance banks are doing a marvelous job of going into smaller areas because they
right,
control the costs.
right.
The large banks are bloated with costs and with compliances and with regulations. And when a small finance bank becomes a regular bank, will it lose its mojo? I don't know. But yes, it's an interesting, it's an interesting pathway. Let's see what happens. Whether more small finance banks also switch over. And that takes us to the next story. And the next story is quite interesting. It's about textiles. Could you have your partner? So, yes.
The US has doubled import tariffs on Indian textiles and apparel from 25% to 50%. And in some cases, it is 64% for knitted apparel and 60% for woven. And on the surface, this is a trade policy change. But in reality, it's a high impact shock that could rewire sourcing decisions in the dollar 1.5 trillion economy of global apparel market. Within days, major US retailers, Walmart, Target, Amazon, etc., halted new textile orders from India. And the uncertainty over landed cost makes forward contracts risky. Exporters are pushing to dispatch goods before the August 27 tariff enforcement. But again, this is triage and not strategy. The stoppage freezes cash flow and stalls production planning, particularly in hubs like Tirupur, Ludhiana, and Surat. And the US is India's largest market for textile and apparel exports. In fact, between January and May 2025, US textile imports from India totaled $4.59 billion, which is up to 13% year on year. And for 2024 alone, the US market contributed $10.8 billion, which is nearly one third of India's total textile exports. So India is very heavily dependent on US right now, and because of this, industry estimates suggest that if tariff enforcement by Trump takes place, it will lead to a 30 to 35% volume drop if tariff persists beyond a quarter. So I think that we're looking at a sudden shift in relative cost competitiveness. So competitors like Bangladesh and Vietnam with tariffs near 20% gain an immediate price advantage. China, despite its own tariff challenges, has scale logistics and again buyer stickiness. This risk isn't just temporary order loss, it's again re-anchoring of US sourcing patterns. And as we know that this tariff escalation is intertwined with US-India geopolitical frictions, including disputes over agricultural market access and India's continued import of Russian oil. And that makes resolution more complex than a sector-specific lobby effort. So, what do you think? Do you think we should still continue with diplomatic negotiations, or should India
Well,
diversify?
you've got a very interesting story, and the textile sector is going to see a lot of churn here. My personal belief is that even though I was personally against the UK FTA earlier, because India needs FDI, not an FTA, in fact, the UK FTA might be a lifeline for the Indian textile sector because it allows duty-free textile exports to the UK, and the UK has the lowest tariffs for the US of 10%. Expect traders to start exporting to the US, to the UK, and expect traders in the UK to see an opportunity there for making more money, taking them, whether they rebrand it or not. Indian textile exports will find a market. They're good, they're reasonably priced, and with Bangladesh being edged out, India has a chance, and maybe the UK FTA will provide the loophole, will provide the strategy to continue exporting. Let's see what happens. But it's a great story. Thank you. And that takes us to the next story, and that is by Aparna.
In a notable seasonal shift, demand for jobs under the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, MGNREGAs, has fallen to a 10-month low of 16.6 million households in July 2025, as per the Ministry of Rural Development. This marks a steep down from 27.56 million in June, 28.38 million in May, and 20.12 million in April, signaling reduced dependency on the scheme. The decline is largely attributed to a favorable monsoon, which typically sends rural workers back to their agricultural field for the Kharif sowing season. This seasonal dip is common as farming becomes more viable sources of income during the rains. However, what's different this year is that July 2025 demand is even lower than the July 2024 demand, possibly indicating a stronger or earlier start to agricultural activities. Experts, though, urge caution. While the numbers may suggest an improvement in rural employment, they also highlight the lack of non-agricultural job opportunities in India's villages. MGNREGAs act as a barometer of rural distress, where high demand often signals a shortage of other work. A drop in numbers isn't always a sign of economic strength, it also reflects rural India's continued dependence on the monsoon. The rapid fall in demand from over 28 million in May to just 16.6 million in July raises questions about the stability of rural incomes and the urgent need for year-round employment options. While the monsoon may bring temporary relief, sustainable rural growth depends on reducing the seasonal volatility. Going forward, policy measures must focus not only on supporting agricultural livelihood but also on strengthening rural industries, entrepreneurship, and skill based employment, ensuring that rural workers have access to stable income regardless of seasonal cycles. So, what's your take on this?
Thank you, Aparna. A very important story when MGNREGA is important for the rural sector. The poor offtake of MGNREGA in the last few months could be because of several factors. Is it because the government's finally waking up to the to the fake Aadhaar cards? And that is why the beneficiaries of MGNREGA have also declined? Or is it because the government did not have enough money to finance such schemes? Or is it because the government itself was a little lethargic, being distracted by other crises around? We do not know, but this fall is significant for the rural sector. Thank you very much, Aparna. And yes, we have reached the end of today's session, and we've also exceeded our time, but let me take up two things. First, a reminder, please click the subscribe button if you're not a subscriber already. Please click the like button, it helps us immensely. And most important, tell your friends about us. And I can take one question today, and that is, will the SMB rates, the small finance bank rates be governed by the RBI? That's one question. There's another question that's come up. Will NBFCs also become banks? What's your take, Katya?
See, I personally, I think NBFCs require the kind of freedom that they have in terms of picking their customers, etc., etc. So I don't think they're interested. Like I said, Rashesh Shah has very clearly said that there is no upside in having a banking license at this point in time. Small finance banks are actually doing banks jobs already. They're following the regulations. The problem is they are getting downtraded because small finance is added to their name. So I think it will help them more. I don't think NBFCs need to be.
Thanks, Katya.
Thanks.
But interesting one. And there's one more question which is there. Will Trump get more incensed if India starts working with China? Well, he's incensed already. What can you do?
Right.
Anyway, I will not take up any more questions now because we've reached the end of our timing. Thank you very much for being with us. And today is the last day of the week. Have a lovely weekend ahead. But do tune in again on Monday morning. We'd love to see you once again. Have a great weekend and have a great day. Good luck.